Hey everyone, it's another Talking Race Walking podcast, and this time we've gone across the water. We've gone over to England to talk to British Olympian and race walker Tom Bosworth. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an honor to have you. I'm a newer race walker, kind of longtime runner, newer race walker, but you were one of the names that I came across really early on. I think I was looking for videos on race walking, and one of the videos that stuck out and jumped out at me and really demonstrated how fast race walkers can go was kind of like that viral video of you at the Diamond League doing that mile world record. I mean, just to start off with, folks, I mean, if you don't know who Tom is, he's an extremely fast race walker. And I would say are actually probably your strengths are actually in the shorter distances, because you seem to have a knack for really going fast and maintaining that technique at unusually short distances. So what was that world record like to start this podcast off with?
Yeah, I mean it's something that has been a highlight of my own career for for the rest of the time I was competing, and something I became quite well known for back home in the UK and got a lot of press over, which was great. It was fantastic, but for me, it was more about the publicity of the event. And I don't mean that about for me personally. I meant taking race walking to, the first ever Diamond League event. I know the other race walkers who we invited were just ecstatic to be involved. And I think that is really like sort of a bit of an important message. It was a bit of at the same time, it was a bit of a sad message that we were at that point, but it was so successful, and loads of people kind of learned about the sport as a result of it. So, yeah, I was obviously delighted to break that world record, and it's such an iconic distance. But yeah, there was so much more to that day in the Olympic Stadium.
Yeah, I can see that, and I understand it, having jumped into the race walking world, and especially in its current state right now. But I mean, that was fast with 5:31:08. I think that's a decently quick running mile for most folks. So I think that really put it into perspective for a lot of people who weren't familiar
Absolutely.
with the sport. So I think that was amazing. So and so I've mentioned to people they may not be familiar with you, and they should be. But if you're new to race walking, or perhaps you haven't stumbled across Tom, which I don't know how you wouldn't have. Like I said, Olympian, 2016 Commonwealth Games silver medalist, 7 times or more indoor national champion, 10 times outdoor, been in the Diamond League, you've been to world champs, you've pretty much done the whole gamut. And you recently hung up the race walking shoes with, I guess, a last race at your home club in 2022. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The plan was always to try and go on to Paris, but I guess my career was kind of shortened a little bit through injury. But I think I could have kept going. But well, I could have kept going. But after sort of the Tokyo Olympics, I got injured in the build up to that. I knew it was never going to be the same to what it was before. Excuse me. So it was. I was like, well, I've been doing this internationally for 13 years now. Maybe it's time to, look at starting a family, having a bit of a normal life. I was getting offers, quite exciting offers to do other things outside of sport. It was getting hard to turn those down. So, yeah, I mean, like you say, and it was amazing. Even this summer, I was at the World Championships spectating in Budapest, and I had some other race walkers and athletes coming up asking for pictures and stuff, and that to me was just amazing. Like I was never very good at sport as a kid. I never thought I could have a career in any sport, let alone when I tried race walking. I was really awful at it to have ended up in the place I have. So I hope I've done the sport some good in raising the profile all around the world, it seems. And that's something I feel very blessed to have been able to experience and contribute.
Well, you've definitely contributed from what I've seen. And yeah, it would have been nice to see you in Paris. But I mean, I think I just talked to a race walker Canadian who kind of had that same thing. You know, he had done a lot in his career and the same thing, and all of a sudden it was like, well, you get a little older and go, yeah, there's other things. Life is there as well. And I think you had to make that choice of when do you sort of transition to something beyond sport. So I think everybody makes that decision, you know, on their own. So
Absolutely.
so what have you been doing since? What is Tom Bosworth without the race walking? What keeps you? What drives you these days?
Yeah, it's a little bit scary because you know, as an athlete, your life is each year is sort of planned out to the day to get you to the major championships, whatever that is that year. And obviously, over on this side of the pond, we have quite a few. Probably we have a championship every year, which I know you don't necessarily have over that side. We have Commie Games, which obviously you guys are involved with, but also European Championships, European Cup, and then the World ones, World Race Walking Team Champs, World Champs, and Olympic Games. So there was always something to aim for. It was a bit relentless, to be perfectly honest, at times, but you know, that's what we lived for. So it's very weird to go and sit down and realize, oh, I've got nothing long term at all. I don't. If it doesn't even matter what I do next week, let alone what I do today. And so that was hard. I planned my retirement quite well, so I kind of, you know, I made sure September 2022, I was walking into a job of sorts and opportunities that perhaps I turned down earlier in my career. I was now trying to take advantage of. So I'm doing a little bit in the media with Sky Sports and trying to build that slowly but surely. I've got my first radio gig on one of the BBC radio channels coming up.
Nice.
But I'm also working still in the sport. I work for a management company now, and I represent Perseus Karlstrom and everything he's doing, which is fantastic. You know, to see he's a lifelong, well, career-long friend of mine. I think we met in 2009. So yeah, I'm hoping to help him and really raise his profile. And yeah, working with a lot of track and field athletes, up and coming superstars, hopefully, and help them sort of figure their way in this crazy time. That is sort of a mix of traditional sport, but also the world of social media and those other things that come your way when you become relatively successful within this sport.
No, that's great. Yeah, keeping your foot in. And yeah, no, I've had the privilege of talking to Perseus a few years back for did a blog at that one point. Yeah, really nice guy, and everybody seems to like him, and he's really doing well right now. So I think I gave him a poke and see if he can bring him on over the next few months as well. I'm trying to give a wide array of race walkers because I think it's one of the few really global sports as well. If you look at the Worlds and Olympics, I mean, some sports, it's, you know, there's a few countries that are really strong, where in race walking there are countries that have strengths, but when you look across, you know, that line of race walkers going by, there's a really huge selection of walkers from so many countries, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's I remember thinking back a few years ago. Can't remember where it was, but it was a few World Championships, I think, in Doha, and I finished 7th that day, and I was delighted. And I was like, I'd been injured that summer and didn't know whether I was even going to compete. So to go and finish 7th in such a challenging conditions as well, I was over the moon. I thought, oh, where would I have been European athlete? And I was like, I would have been 5th European athlete. And I was like, oh man, I remember being, I think, 7th again the year before at the European Championships. And some events in Europe are easier because, you know, you don't have like some of the African nations or the Americans or whatever. So getting a medal is that little bit easier. And in the walks, it's just not. You know, Europe is incredibly strong, the diversity within Europe. But then, yeah, as we know, the Asian countries are so strong. South Americans, obviously Canada has a few they've thrown in recent years, as have Australia. So, you know, even the South Africans are coming along, and now the Kenyans, and we just need the USA to catch up a little bit, and it really is so international. It's and which is why it's funny that it gets a bit of stick, and some people who don't understand think, oh, perhaps not everybody, it's not a worldwide event, it's just a few countries that do it, and so it's easy to get into or something like that, easy to qualify for the big competitions. It's far from it.
That's interesting too. And like I say, it's a different perspective here in North America. And when I say North American, and I had Dave McGovern give me a hard time on that because I always forget our very southern counterparts here in Mexico who regularly would, are very strong in race walking. So, but I guess Canada and the US, we have race walkers, but it's a very small community. What is it like in terms of like I know what it's like here. In Europe, I see it, it's very at least more popular than here. What's the race walking community like in the UK or like in England? What do you guys have it in your schools? How does one find out about it? How did you get into it?
No, I mean, in the UK, I think COVID has really had a bit of a negative effect, unfortunately, on a lot of numbers. Actually, and that's within the whole sport of track and field, not just race walking. But I got into it local club, and obviously the country's smaller, so you can compete all over, which helps massively. What our country is a state in the USA, for example. But that helps. But our numbers are dwindling, and that's a real concern. We're doing a bit of a push into other clubs where there aren't any race walk coaches. So we're massively reliant on traditional athletics clubs, of where we get our race walkers from. And if there's not a coach there, they won't even give it a go, even to get some points in the, we have little local leagues and that sort of thing, and national leagues. So that's the only way. Schools athletics just doesn't really exist over here, which is really worrying. We're very football focused, and a bit of cricket, a bit of rugby, really. So we're heavily reliant on clubs, but we're giving a bit of a push. I'm working with one athletics club now. I'm retired, to train up one of their coaches to be a race walk coach, and I'm just gonna. That's what my own personal mission is, just to do that with a few coaches in a part of the country where there aren't any walkers. But in Europe, it helps if you get into the sport and you become a little bit good, so you're capable perhaps of then going abroad. We have that ability to get on a plane and fly to mainland Europe and compete in all sorts of different races of all sorts of different levels, and that really, really helps. And then you have the countries like Spain and Portugal and well, I mean, you can name so many countries, but especially Spain, Portugal, and Italy, who they just can turn out these athletes one after another, and they're incredibly good through their athletics system. It might not be still respected, and you speak to those athletes and they say, oh, we still don't feel like we get the same level of respect that other athletes get, and that's just education, in my opinion. Worldwide, that's just education needed. But the setups are very different, and that the number, I think if there were a few more international level races in USA or Canada or things like that, that would help, because you get that sort of quality on your doorstep a little bit more. And again, what I mean by doorstep is difficult for such vast and big countries, but it certainly will give the full ladder. Whereas if you've just got that beginner sort of stage in local clubs, it's not going to go anywhere. There's no pathway.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to hear. Yeah, so it sounds like you have the similar problems, where it's not necessarily prominent in the school athletics program, but the fact that you guys are so condensed and have a lot of clubs supports that race walking at the club level. Which I talked to a colleague of mine who's from the UK, and it's a similar discussion where it's so easy to go to competitions, everything's so close, there's lots of clubs. I mean, for us, it's almost 5,000 kilometers to go from one coast to the other. So when we have a national championships on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast, it's 5,000 kilometers, and it's not only distance, but it's also limiting in terms of you may not be able to get out there, or it's just, it's very tough here. But it's interesting to see we're not alone in terms of still fighting to get kind of that race walking into the athletic school program, because I think that's where the future is. You have to have the young walkers to develop into future Olympians, to inspire just regular folks, and even keep
100%.
inspiring the masters. Yeah, so I think there's similar battle all the way around. So the other thing I want to mention is, I know throughout your career, I try and focus on different topics, I think, for each podcast. I know you've been a real strong advocate for mental health as well, because I think we often forget that aspect to training. How has that affected you through your career, and what's your take on it now?
Yeah, I was always a pretty mentally strong athlete, and in fact, my coach always used to say that my training was never quite as good as quite a lot of other international level guys. Yeah, on race day, I would switch on he called Tom mode, and somehow, I'd race well above my sort of training level. So I didn't expect to have any sort of battle with mental health whatsoever, let alone to get to the point of being suicidal, in which I was in 2019. So, that was really a shock. It really shocked me into action a little bit. And yeah, it's obviously now something very, very close to my heart, because I thought, oh, this is something that it's never going to affect me. You don't realize quite how likely it is, or how possible it is to affect anybody. And it only takes a few little triggers, and these things build up over time to start to realize that, or you don't realize that something is wrong, and day-to-day behaviors have become normal, and they're far from it. So yeah, I mean, using exercise for mental health is something I really champion, but at the same time, that was my issue. I got so obsessed with seeing how good I could get to, and that pressure and that neglect of everything else in my life, and I mean literally everything else in my life, because I realized if I could sacrifice any little bit more, that might, get me to the next sort of stage, which was the podium. So and it resulted in doing the opposite and making me very, very miserable. And frustratingly, when I was at my happiest and fittest was probably February of 2020, and we all know what happened in that spring. So I feel a little bit like I never got that sort of proof that if you're at your happiest, you're probably going to be at your healthiest and then your most successful. So yeah, I mean, mental health is something we all need to be more aware of, but I think it's also really important that we don't go too far the opposite way, and make ourselves, it's too weak is not the right term at all, but we take away the aspects of what mental health is. And that's it's fine to have a bad day, and you sometimes need to be a bit strong, and you need to push through, and you can have a bit of anxiety, you can have a bit of stress, but knowing the difference between when that becomes far more and it leads to depression, and it leads, to an actual mental health problem. I like to link it, if you've got a bit of a ankle pain and you have that every day, and if you leave that, that'll build up to something massive, and you'll end up rolling your ankle, and it'll balloon up, and you break your ankle or something like that. And that's the same thing with your mental health. And if we just kind of kept on top of that little aching ankle, that sore ankle, you'll never get to that point where you need help, and you potentially put your life in danger. So that's kind of the way I kind of make it kind of relatable, I guess, to our physical health.
Yeah, no, it's a topic that really touches me. I had a low point in my life too, when my daughter was born. Just my life kind of really changed, and hit a rock bottom as well. So I have been in a very similar place, and so seeing you go through a mental struggle as well, I connected with that. So it's a very personal thing for me. I'm a very strong advocate as well for mental health. Like you said, you don't often realize how important it is, or what a struggle it can be, until you're there. So I thank you for sharing. So not all of us do. I tried to share as well, but I think it's good for people to hear that from others. So
Yeah,
appreciate that.
absolutely.
So Want to tie up this race walking podcast with one final question. It's kind of something I've asked most of the guests I've had so far. I'm going to try and perhaps ask it in a different way. You're outside the sport now, but not that far away from competition. You're still involved with one foot inside the sport. You mentioned the mile record at the Diamond League, how it was something the sport needed. It was neat to showcase the sport. What's one thing you think race walking needs to do? I mean, I think we can all agree it's kind of it's in a difficult spot right now. There's some change, there's some discussion, there's some controversy, change in distances. What's one thing you think race walking sort of globally needs to do to solidify its future?
Oh, how long have you got?
Yeah, I had this problem the last chat I had too. Yeah, exactly. I know.
I think to summarize, I think for a lot of race walkers, because we feel like we get disrespected quite a lot, and given how difficult this sport is, and I'm sure, and I know everyone says, oh, my events are hardest and so on, but race walking is such a painful action, just doing it, until you can master it, really. And even then, it's incredibly challenging movement. I relate it to people going for an easy run. Even at the elite guys, they can go for an easy run. We can't go for an easy race walk because of the technique. And then you put alongside all of that, the fact that even international guys struggle to do it as a full-time job and earn any money from it, which you need to do it full-time. And at the same time, it doesn't perhaps get the respect because people say, oh, we see athletes with both feet off the ground, it means they're running. And they've got no idea about the straight leg or about, flight time and anything like that. So we become quite, I guess, pessimistic. And so we always perhaps think that everyone's out to get us. World Athletics are out to remove the sport, or, governing bodies or media sponsors, whatever it is. So first of all, I think race walkers and coaches need to work with clubs and governing bodies and help educate and help push the event by perhaps suggesting how we can work with the sport. I really would love to see a 3K or a 5K, but I think 3K is better in terms of the time length. Put on at sort of continental tour level athletics meets, which happen all over the country. Nowadays they all have to be live streamed. They have to have a little bit of prize money and that sort of thing. And, we're talking 11 minutes or about 13, 14 minutes for women of track time that can be at the start of the session and included in the highlights. And then you've got a race walk part of the international sort of circuit. That will naturally bring more track events on. And that's where I think the sport is going. At the Olympic level, I 100% think that one road event, given cost, given the mindset of the world athletics right now, is again the right way to go. It might not be what I agree with, but it is the right way to go in terms of keeping the event at the Olympic Games, which is what we must do. Otherwise, the whole pack of cards comes down, because if you get funded as an international level, or its exposure is big once every 4 years, at the Olympic Games. Without that, the whole thing falls down. And so, and if we, people in athletics don't get race walking because they don't see it. They don't come out and stand at the side of the road. They don't see it at athletics competitions because it's just not there. They saw it more. They started to understand it. They saw how fast people could walk. More people gave it a go, so they realized how difficult it is. That's more race walking means more race walkers, means more people understand it, and that's kind of how I can put it. And if there aren't those opportunities to climb up that ladder all the way up, whatever country you're in, then that's never going to happen. So yeah, I love what Diego Garcia is doing in Spain with his big Madrid 10K race. That's absolutely awesome. But having we had I think it was Rome Diamond League. We had a 3K on there last year or this year. I'm speaking to various diamond leagues around the world about potentially putting them on. That's not been very positive so far, but I'm working away. London, obviously, we did 2 at London Diamond League in 17, 18. Hopefully, our British walkers can get to the level that I was at. That will justify putting another one on and going for one of my world records and making some headlines and yeah, making the sport entertaining.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree. I think there's definitely different perspectives and opinions, but I would definitely agree with you on that one. From being newer to the sport, is I really noticed that it's a lack of visibility. I mean, there's nobody wants change. Everybody likes to keep things as they are.
Of course.
But I definitely agree. Even some of our events regionally here or whatever, too oftentimes a race walk event is hidden somewhere on some sort of 1K loop in the middle of nowhere. It's trying to make it visible to people so that if it's not available at schools right now, we need to work on that, but people see it. If it can't be a 20K, say, like you say, at the Diamond League, well, let's do a 1 mile walk so that it's visible, because if it's not there, it's going to get forgotten. So I think there's a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, we want to keep the distances, but at the same time, if we don't make people aware of it, we won't have a long distance race. So yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. And I appreciate your opinion, because you've got a lot more expertise and knowledge than I do. I'm just kind of the armchair race walker who found race walking probably way too many years after being a runner. So I probably should have taken it up many years ago. So,
but well, you know what? That's it. That's what's important, is different views and outside, what I call outside views. Not somebody who's grown up with race walking and loves it for what it is, but who's come across and said, "Oh, well, why don't you try this? Or why don't you try something different?" So that's just as valuable.
excellent. Well, I appreciate having you on, Tom. Maybe we'll bring you back a year or so from now, if I can keep this podcast going, and see what you've been up to there. And
Absolutely.
if you've got any race walkers out there, do you think we should be profiling and sharing with the world? Let me know. But it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
My pleasure.
Take care. Keep walking.